Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am Michael Mitchell, Project Manager for the Coalition of Rainforest Nations. This is now the fourth session of our webinar series of six, building up to COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. Today, we will discuss the Paris Agreement and the pros and cons of this new climate regime. If you have questions during the interview, please use the raise hand option at the bottom of your screen or put them in the chat, and we will address them at the appropriate time. Please be advised, this will be recorded for future training purposes. As I've mentioned in our previous webinars, when we were planning the design of the series, the goal was to raise awareness on how the science of climate change brought about policy to address the crisis around the world. As we approach COP26 in just a few weeks, how can we educate people on all the accomplishments that have got us to this point and what crucial issues world leaders, corporations, NGOs, and many others at this event need to address for us to succeed? Today, we have our CFRN Senior Policy Advisor and also Associate Professor of International Environmental Law at the Catholic University of Lille, Leo Masai. Leo, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to continue this journey together.
So far in the series, we've discussed the creation of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. These are where the science of climate change is addressed. And we have also discussed the different milestones of climate negotiations and the work of the Conference of the Parties, the COP, that has produced the Kyoto Protocol, Copenhagen Accord, and the Bali Action Plan, all part of where the policy on climate change acknowledges the science. These accomplishments have all led us to the foremost important international agreement on climate change we have seen to date, the Paris Agreement. We've all heard of it in some context, but do we all understand exactly what this unprecedented document lays out to battle the climate emergency? Leo, you were actively part of this journey leading up to the Paris Agreement. I would like for you to definitely tell us about the experience, but before we do this, and to illustrate how long the negotiating of the Paris Agreement lasted, how about a poll question for our audience? So in your chat, we have a question for you all anonymous, please, is how many years went into developing the Paris Agreement? 2, 5, 7, or 10? Submit your answers and we'll see what the group responds. Okay, so looks like we're kind of tied between 5 years to 10 years. Leo, when you'll get into this, you'll let us know.
Yes, Michael, thank you very much. So actually, it took us 10 years to negotiate and get to the Paris Agreement that we have today. Myself, and together with many other colleagues, have 20 years of COPs, Conference of the Parties, behind. Clearly, a lot of stories and anecdotes that can be told. The Paris Agreement is the result of COP15 that ended with almost 2 days of delay, and that was the only promise that French diplomacy could not keep, finishing on time. All the other promises were kept, and that wasn't an easy task. So the 21st session of the Conference of the Parties, COP21, to the convention successfully concluded a mandate that had been agreed upon at COP17 in Durban in 2011. There, 2015 was set as the last possible deadline to establish a new climate regime for the post-2020 period, and 2015 was. So COP21 concluded 10 years of intense negotiations, where mostly every year, the pace and intensity of multilateral talks and meetings were basically doubled. If you can imagine, we are usually meeting twice per year at the international level. During those 10 years, we met 4 times per year. So a lot of meetings, a lot of commitment, and a lot of discussion and negotiation. And as indicated in our last webinar, the Paris Agreement signaled the end of multilateral talks for the new climate regime, at least the basic rules, and is built upon the Bali Action Plan and the Copenhagen Accord. So the Comité de Paris, that had received the mandate by COP21 to complete the agreement and clean the text from the remaining brackets, convened for the last time in the evening of Saturday, 12 December 2015, to forward the final text of the agreement and associated decision to COP21. The final plenary successfully adopted both instruments at 7:29 p.m. the same day, not without a few minutes of panic spread in the room, and due to a final request. Actually, Michael, before we continue, this may be an interesting poll question for our audience.
Yes. So again, we'll put a poll into the chat. Which country almost prevented the Paris Agreement from being adopted due to the use of one word? Was it Bolivia, Tuvalu, USA, or China? Okay, we also have a close call here. Leo, go ahead.
Yes, so clearly here the answer to this question cannot be Tuvalu or Bolivia, clearly. So that's a big mistake. It could be USA and China. Actually, it has been USA. It was the US. It was the US who at the end of the negotiation almost sacked the entire agreement. So the last hurdle and the panic was generated by a misunderstanding, or maybe someone attempts to rip off the whole group around one single word. And this is just an example of this climate diplomacy and negotiations. The word was shall in paragraph 4.4 of the agreement. The agreed text, now Article 4.4, states, in a quote, developed country parties should continue taking the lead by undertaking economy-wide absolute emission reduction targets. The US did contest that single word, the word shall, which was originally introduced in the draft decision text before the delegates. And therefore, the US even threatened to blow everything up by referring to the term shall, which was erroneously reported in the draft text before the delegates. So they wanted to keep the word should, as they mentioned that as it was agreed in the negotiating rooms. And the difference between shall and should is just an example of how difficult and complex is this negotiation. And the difference between those two words is also very important in legal terms. So the Paris Agreement is the new international treaty which is governing the fight against climate change for the next decades. Like the convention, like the Kyoto Protocol, it is an independent and legally binding international treaty sharing the main objective and the institutional structure. Questionable and still open for debate is the stringency of the agreement, notably the legally binding effect of several of its provisions.
So tell us more about the debate and the legally binding effect of these provisions and what exactly that means.
Yes, exactly, Michael. On mitigation, we're talking about mitigation mainly. The Paris Agreement is built upon a bottom-up approach that is the opposite of what we have under the Kyoto Protocol that included legally binding targets decided at the international level and imposed to countries from the top. For example, it was decided that the European Union had to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 8% in the period 2008-2012. This is just an example. With the Paris Agreement, countries are given the possibility to choose themselves what to do, when to do, and how to do it. And I'm going to repeat that. What to do, when to do, and how to do it. That is left to the countries to decide. And that's a complete shift of the approach, and history will tell us whether this has been the right choice or not. Clearly, the approach used by the Kyoto Protocol didn't produce what the world expected, since at the end, the effect on the environment of the reduction of greenhouse gases by the protocol is very limited. Another difference between the old regime, Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement is the lack of common parameters to verify the actual implementation of actions.
So what did the Paris Agreement call for that these previous initiatives did not emphasize enough?
Well, Michael, when the Paris Agreement was negotiated, the call from the international community was very clear. Action must increase, mitigation is lacking, and more ambition is needed if we want to get even closer to the 1.5 degrees indicated by the latest science, by the IPCC, as Thelma explained to us in the previous webinars. Today, while we speak, this objective, the 1.5 degrees, is still widely disregarded.
The disregard is very unfortunate and is devastating to making change, obviously, but this definitely needs to change.
Yes, exactly. That is why we are here, why we are educating also people to understand what is the Paris Agreement and why the world is going to convene in a few days in Glasgow to help fight to ensure that happens. And in particular, to do anything we can to broaden participation, why don't include strong state actors in the Paris Agreement regime and enhance climate ambition.
Now, explain to us the main elements of the Paris Agreement as you see it. But before you begin, I also want to point out that the key goal for this particular webinar is to try to translate the Paris Agreement in a way that's easy to understand. It's very technical and difficult to interpret, speaking for myself and likely many others.
Yes, thank you, Michael. So let's try to do this. Although, as you said, it's a difficult task. And let me summarize the main elements of the Paris Agreement here for you. So Article 2 is the global objective. And the global objective of the Paris Agreement is very similar to the objective of the Convention in terms of language and scope. It is therefore a general objective that covers three main elements: mitigation, adaptation, and finance. So the first one, mitigation. Mitigation is where you can see the only number reflected in the Paris Agreement. Actually, two numbers to be correct. And that's the mitigation objective. Article 2 calls for parties to strengthen the fight against climate change by limiting the increase of global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and to do anything we can to limit the increase to 1.5. That's a very difficult task. Second element is the adaptation. Adaptation, and the Paris Agreement calls for parties to increase the ability to adapt to what? To the negative impacts, to the negative hazard of climate change and foster climate resilience. And finally, the third element of the global objective is finance, is to make finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development.
Wow, 2 degrees Celsius to 1.5 degrees Celsius sounds quite promising. How are we going to get there?
Well, first of all, let me say that we tried to have one number only. So we tried with 1.5, didn't work, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, then 2. And then at the end, we decided to get two numbers into the agreement. This was the compromise. So the Paris Agreement indicates the end goal, but it does not really specify how we will get there. In this sense, the language or the objective is similar to the convention. So defining how we will get there, it's a job which is left mainly to governments and their choices. This is how far we could go under the existing rules and process.
So now it's time for us to dive into the essentials of the Paris Agreement. Please continue, Leo.
Yes, so the core of the agreement is clearly mitigation and ambition under Article 3 and 4, where the concept of nationally determined contributions is mentioned, a concept and an idea which was agreed a few years before Paris by the parties. So nationally determined contributions are the commitment taken by each individual state towards the Paris Agreement. And those are determined at the national level by governments based on their national procedures. So the purpose of the NDC is to indicate the extent to which each country is going to contribute to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also promote adaptation, for example. In a few weeks in Glasgow, COP26, the Secretariat will make public the latest assessment of all NDCs submitted so far by the countries. However, we can already say that national contributions are highly insufficient to reach the 1.5 goal today. This is confirmed also by an independent review of countries' efforts prepared by an initiative which is called Climate Action Tracker. And this initiative is actually providing indication about the latest emission of NDCs and the different degrees of commitment by the parties. The only official publication is the Secretariat report that, as I mentioned, will be presented at COP in Glasgow. So Article 5 also tells that parties should communicate their NDCs every 5 years with a view to represent a progression on ambition. That's Article 4. And therefore, it's very important that the new NDC and the updated NDC, it's a progression in terms of ambition. Then Article 5, REDD+, very important for rainforest countries. Parties are encouraged to take action to implement and support REDD+ activities. And for REDD+ activities, we refer to activities to reduce deforestation and forest degradation, or activities that are providing for sustainable management of forests, for example. Let's also not forget here that when we entered the COP21 venue in Paris, all countries but the CFRN countries were against the inclusion of REDD+ in the new agreement.
So way to go, CFRN.
Yes, we are very proud of this, and it was a really a very delicate exercise to have REDD+ in the agreement. So Article 6, let's continue our journey, is about the market mechanism. The carbon market approach, which was introduced by the Kyoto Protocol, if you remember, is confirmed by the Paris Agreement. And in particular, there are two mechanisms which are created by the new regime. The first, which is referred to in 6.2, is the equivalent of emissions trading, where parties will be able to exchange greenhouse gas emission reduction and removal credits. We call them ITMOs, a very weird acronym. The second mechanism is the equivalent of CDM, project-based mechanism, aiming at the promotion of sustainable development. Also important to remind is that the rules for those mechanisms to function are still to be agreed. So, Michael, are you still there?
Yes, I am keeping up, and you're doing a very good job with helping me understand. And I hope everyone else is following as well. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to use your raise hand option and put them in the chat.
Yes, so let's continue. Article 7 covers adaptation and calls for parties to enhance their capacity. So adaptation is another key element of the Paris Agreement. Enhance capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change. Parties are also called to submit periodic information about adaptation actions and plans, as well as support needed. So they have to provide those information to the Secretariat on a regular basis. Article 8 refers to loss and damage, which always goes together with adaptation. And with loss and damage, we refer to a mechanism which was created in Warsaw a few years before Paris to enhance the protection of vulnerable countries from climate change. And to do that through specific actions like, for example, early warning systems, emergency preparedness, and risk insurance. On Article 9, we find and we see finance, which is clearly a key element of the agreement. Article 9 on finance does not refer to any number, but it reiterates that developed countries should take the lead and will continue to provide support to developing countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance resilience. Unfortunately, the Paris Agreement is silent on the amount of finance support that will be provided, but parties are very active in discussing this at the COP level, as we will see in a few days in Glasgow. And then we have Article 10 and 11, which goes together and talk about the support to developing countries. In particular, Article 10 recognizes the importance of technology development and transfer in order to improve resilience to climate change and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the long term. And 11 talks about capacity building and enhancing the capacity and the ability of developing country parties to take effective climate change mitigation and adaptation actions. The transparency framework represents another milestone of the new regime. So the Paris Agreement has established a new enhanced transparency framework, that's how we call it, under Article 13. So parties are required to provide information on several issues, mainly action, mitigation, adaptation, greenhouse gas emissions, and support. The support that is provided and the support that is received. This is
why this took up to 10 years to negotiate. There's been a lot to cover so far. I hope everyone's following again. There's a lot of information to digest.
Yes, exactly. And let's not forget that every single word that we have in the agreement is the result of a compromise, of a consensus among almost 200 governments all around the world. So let me conclude with the two main elements remaining from the Paris Agreement. The first one is Article 14, global stocktake. So we have decided under the Paris Agreement that parties will periodically, every 5 years, assess take stock of the collective progress towards achieving the 1.5 goal. And the first of this meeting, the first stock take, will happen in 2023, and then every 5 years following from that. And then compliance, which is another key point and tricky issue. Article 15, forget what we have now under the Kyoto Protocol regime with a strong enforcement body. The compliance regime under the Paris Agreement is to facilitate implementation and promote compliance. That's it. The Paris Agreement Compliance Committee will be non-adversarial and non-punitive. These are words which are in the Paris Agreement itself. In simple words, a system with and rules with no teeth. And therefore we are in the hands of the parties and their willingness and their capability to keep the promises. So that is where we are now with the existing rules and process.
But the Paris Agreement certainly didn't bring climate negotiations to an end.
No, absolutely not, Michael. Climate negotiations continue after Paris and are still ongoing. We see each day working in the field. The Paris Agreement is an international treaty that is going to last forever, and therefore is not open to operational rules and details of its implementation. Those are defined through COP decisions, and to be correct, CMA decisions when we talk about the Paris Agreement. So the negotiations continued after Paris, and in Katowice in 2018, CMA 1 adopted the first set of rules, especially on NDCs, adaptation communication, transparency, compliance, and global stocktake. Only two pieces of the puzzle are still missing today. To conclude, Michael and everyone, the Paris Agreement undoubtedly forms a milestone in the fight against climate change. That's with no doubt. It sets the framework for the first global common action against greenhouse gas emissions by both developed and developing countries together jointly. The Paris Agreement is applicable to all parties. The upcoming period will tell whether the structure and rules of the new treaty form a workable framework to tackle climate change and keep the global temperature rise well below 2 degrees and 1.5 above pre-industrial levels. One of the first challenges in this respect will be to strengthen the commitments of the parties, and that's what we were going to discuss in Glasgow, as the combined effect of their current contributions would bring up the temperature far more than 2 degrees. Now COP26 is waiting for us, and it's crucial that the two missing pieces of the Paris Agreement rulebook, notably transparency and Article 6, the carbon market, are finalized promptly. Stay connected, all of you. This will be discussed in the next webinars.
I'm looking forward to that. So, Leo, this has been really informative, and you did a fantastic job walking us through the highly sophisticated language of the Paris Agreement in an easy to understand way. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too. I guess you did a great job. I didn't see any questions come in, so your explanations must have been great for everyone, which is good to hear. So thanks again for joining us today and for everything you do to help with fighting climate change. We're all in this together. Please come check us out next Friday, same time, for part 5 of our series, Where Are We Going? Understanding the Paris Agreement through the actual science behind it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leo. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.